Good morning, everyone. At our caucus meeting today, we were briefed by both Steny Hoyer and Chairwoman Rosa DeLauro about the progress that continues to be made with respect to the continuing resolution. It's our hope and expectation that the Senate will vote in a bipartisan way at some point later on today. And then we will be able to do what is necessary here in the House to keep the government open, to make sure that it can continue to properly function and deliver for the American people, and that we address some of the emergencies that have taken place here in America over the last several weeks, last several months, that require the federal government to act in a decisive way to be there for everyday Americans who are struggling and have been afflicted by disasters. House Democrats are going to continue to put people over politics, fight for lower cost, better paying jobs, and safer communities, and to draw a clear contrast with extreme MAGA Republicans who are out of control, don't believe in reproductive freedom, don't believe in Social Security, don't believe, in many cases, in democracy. We have a vision for the future to continue to be there for everyday Americans, and they continue to put politics over patriotism, to give us nothing but talking points and platitudes devoid of any substance, any vision, any agenda for the American people. And I'll yield to the distinguished Vice Chair of the House Democratic Caucus, Pete Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the chairman mentioned, our highest priority in the caucus that we talked about this week is funding government. We know that our caucus is going to stand ready to work collaboratively to do that. We'll be here as long as it takes. We're going to make sure that we fund the priorities that are important for this country. On a housekeeping note, January 6th committee, as you saw, the chairman and I and the Democratic caucus send our thoughts to our colleagues in Florida, as well as citizens in Florida who are still navigating the destruction, many of them with millions without power. We want to make sure from the January 6th committee perspective that all of our members can participate in the next public hearing. That's why we're looking at the calendar, and we will let all of you know and let the public know as soon as we have a new date. As the chairman also mentioned, House Democratic Caucus is putting people over politics. We continue to work, and once we leave DC, we're going to go back to our districts and we're going to talk about the important strides that we've made to lower the cost of prescription drugs, in light of the pharmaceutical industry saying that there would be consequences for Democrats in doing that. We're going to put gun safety at the forefront and talk about the bipartisan bill that did just that. We're going to talk about bringing jobs back to the United States, investing in our communities, the Infrastructure Improvement and Jobs Act, those as well as reproductive freedoms that the chairman mentioned. Those are the priorities. That's what's happening on the ground. That's what people are talking about. That's what our members are conveying to the public. We're going to take this message through October and have a frank and honest conversation with our constituents. And we look forward to doing just that, and talking about the achievements that we have made when we put people over politics. With that, the chairman will answer all your tough questions.
So I'm wondering the status of the legislation that would ban government officials from trading stocks. I know that there was some lawmakers in the caucus that don't support it, including Hoyer. Is that going to be put to a vote this week as was planned?
Well, bill text has been released. The issue was not raised in the caucus meeting today, but there are ongoing conversations with various parts of the House Democratic Caucus about this issue. I strongly support the legislation, but from a timing standpoint, that's a question that ultimately will be decided by our majority leader.
Thank you. To that end, though, when they passed the Stock Act about 10 years ago, part of it was not so much that there was this groundswell among members to pass that bill. It was that there was an external groundswell that the consequences for members would be if you didn't pass the bill. That doesn't seem to be the case this time. In other words, there's not pressure from the outside to pass this bill. Is that why this is taking so long to pass this piece of legislation?
I would disagree with the premise that it's taking so long. It's a legislative process that follows regular order. You have a bill that has been released right now. It provides members an opportunity to evaluate it. Many members have been very vocal about their support for moving forward. It's my expectation that at some point that will happen, but we also have a legislative process to follow. For the back.
Question for the Vice Chair. We saw Ginny Thomas walk into a deposition room a short time ago. What does the committee hope to learn from her, and do you expect any of that testimony to be in this next hearing?
I'm not going to speak to the contents of the next hearing. I saw the video as well. I generally don't speak to witnesses that come before the committee, but I'll say, broadly that the committee has been very clear that we'd like to hear from Ginny Thomas, her discussions and coordination and text messages to Mark Meadows, as well as specifically to John Eastman. John Eastman, for all of for everyone at home, is the same individual who came up with this idea and scheme that a federal judge has ruled was likely illegal, and conspired to delay the proceedings here and has criminal exposure. She had conversations and was messaging John Eastman. We want to ask questions about that. We think that that's fair, and we plan to ask those questions of her. I can't speak to the answers or how the committee will proceed after that, but we'll, like many individuals who've come before us, we'll hear the testimony. We'll continue the investigation. We'll continue having conversations, and when it's relevant, we'll present it to the public.
Go back to the side. Yeah.
Is there any issues or changes or additions to the CR that your caucus finds to be so important that it could potentially push this past the 11:59 deadline and into the weekend?
Yeah, I think we're on track to be able to move forward with funding the government in advance of the deadline. But at the moment, as is often the case, we're subject to the timing in the Senate. And once the Senate is able to act, hopefully sooner rather than later, the bill will be sent over to the House. There'll be a rule. We'll debate the rule. That rule will pass, and then we'll debate the substance of the continuing resolution, and then we will pass it and send it to the president's desk. Hopefully, all of that will happen by tomorrow. We are prepared to act as soon as the Senate acts.
All I would add is the only reason we're in this position is because Rosa DeLauro has been, at the table with Senate counterparts throughout this process. So from a substantive perspective, the Chairwoman DeLauro gave a readout of the high points in the bill, some of the changes that have been made, and additional funding for key priorities that we have been talking about for months. We appreciate her work and the appropriation staff work in getting us this far. So we feel that it's a reasonable product. Again, like the chairman said, we're just waiting on the Senate, but we don't anticipate any hiccups once it gets to our chamber. We can't control what hour of the day that happens, though.
Thank you, Romo.
Let's ask a question of the Vice Chair again on Ginny Thomas. Was the plan always to meet with her today, or was that meeting adjusted after this rescheduled committee hearing? Also, were there any conditions agreed upon for her testimony between the committee and her legal team? And then a third question, what is the likelihood that we could see this rescheduled hearing happen next week?
A lot of questions there. I'll work backwards. It's just a calendar issue. People shouldn't read anything more into it than that. There's a Jewish holiday next week. Bless you. There's a Jewish holiday next week. Members have some obligations that I don't want to get into. And so we're just having conversations with members as to the soonest possible date that we can get back here. We're going to do it. We're going to come back into town and we're going to have that hearing. Is any discussion between councils, between our council, and I should give some kudos to the January 6th committee, attorneys who have been helping us and the capable staff that we have. There's a lot of consultation and coordination with council for individuals who are coming in. That's just part of the process, coordinating dates and times. The hearing date and this date for this interview, we're on two separate paths the entire time, just working through logistics of timing. So one doesn't have anything to do with the other. Both were just, based on the calendar in front of us. And we'll see what happens. And we can't speak to, members can't speak to, how cooperative a witness is going to be or whether they're going to invoke privileges and rights, but we can control the level of coordination to get them physically in the room and to work with their counsel to ensure that happens, and that happened here. So none of this was any different than the hundreds of other witnesses who've come before us.
Second row.
On the Electoral Compact, the Senate already marked up its version, House passed its version. Looks like this is going to happen in the lame duck. So how much of a priority is it to actually get this done before the end of the year?
Well, it's the highest of priorities. We've seen that free and fair elections as a principle has been under assault. The right to vote under assault. Peaceful transfer of power under assault. The rule of law under assault. And we've acted in the House in a bipartisan way with comprehensive legislation to protect the integrity of presidential elections. And we look forward to the Senate doing the same, and then we'll come together. It's a high priority for us. I believe it's a high priority for the senators as well. They've been working in a bipartisan way through their process, and at some point we'll be able to get together and figure out how to proceed with the two different pieces of legislation.
Back on the topic of stock legislation, I know you said it didn't come up in caucus this morning, but I'm wondering what you're hearing.
I expected you to ask me a different question.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm wondering. I mean, what are you hearing from members in terms of their opposition to the bill? And do you have any sort of estimate in terms of, is it a lot of members who are opposed to this? Is it just a few? I mean, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, no, I maybe Pete can speak to this, but I have not personally spoke to anyone who's expressed strong opposition to the legislation. It was just released. I'm sure members are reviewing it. I think you've had substantial parts of the caucus express strong support for proceeding in this area. I've expressed strong support for proceeding in this area, and I think sooner rather than later, based on the timing and the schedule that is presented to us by the majority leader, we'll be able to consider it.
Like the chairman, I support the bill and the piece of legislation. I think that Zoe Lofgren did an impressive job in trying to hear from members and put together a piece of legislation that is important. We support transparency and accountability. We know that the existing law isn't perfect, and we want to make changes that are reasonable. I've heard from members who aren't supportive of the bill. It's a thin margin. Whether members would vote against the bill is a separate conversation. Like the chairman said, they're going through the bill. The final bill text was just released recently. We marked it up, or we had a conversation about it, a hearing about it in House administration, talking about qualified blind trust, talking about applicability. So we've had some members have had more conversations about it. Some members have specific questions. Members are going through this, and they're going to make their own decisions. If the bill has support now or later in the year, then I suspect it'll come to the floor. But that's a question for the majority leader.
We'll go to the third row. Thanks, sir.
So we've got the ECA, we've got stocks, we've got the defense bill, and we've got, of course, funding the government. Beyond those four, is there anything else that you think is possible for Democrats to move through after the election?
Well, our focus right now is on funding the government. That's our highest priority. I expect that we'll be able to do so in advance of the midnight deadline tomorrow. In terms of what may come, down the road, we'll consider that down the road. We are just communicating with the American people what our vision has been and will continue to be of putting people over politics, fighting to lower costs, better paying jobs, safer communities, and pointing to our track record of doing all of the above. I think was that. Was some.
Real quick, just wanted to know, obviously the permitting reform was removed from the CR. Do you see within your caucus a vehicle for any sort of permitting legislation moving forward in the lame duck before the end of the year?
That issue hasn't really been discussed. Oh,
Hurricane Ian.
yes.
The Biden administration's kind of made a preemptive notice against the oil company against price hikes related to the hurricane. Is Congress keeping tabs on this to try to protect the consumer as well?
Well, I think our focus is always in making sure that the best interest of the American consumer is protected. We have a strong track record of doing so. Throughout the duration of this Congress, I'm thankful for the Biden administration's preemptive action, and hopefully the oil and gas companies will do the right thing and put people over their own profits.
Chief, this is your last tomorrow, probably the last time you guys vote before when you come back, election will happen. What are you telling lawmakers to talk about, and what do you want them to focus on? What's the one thing that you want every member to go out and talk about in the next 30 days or countdown? I'm sure you guys know better than I do, but what's the key issue you need them to be talking about? Is it an accomplishment? Is it abortion?
Well, I'll yield to Pete on this, but we have an incredible track record of accomplishment. The American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, gun safety legislation for the first time in 30 years, the Inflation Reduction Act, where we've been able to act in a decisive way in terms of addressing the climate crisis, put our planet on a sustainable path forward, lower energy costs, strengthen the Affordable Care Act, lower healthcare costs, and drive down the high price of life-saving prescription drugs for millions of Americans. That's a tremendous track record of accomplishment that proves the point that when we say we're going to put people over politics and fight to lower costs for better paying jobs and for safer communities, we mean it because we've done it and we're going to continue to do it. At the same time, whatever decisions the American people have to make over the next few weeks are not a referendum, it's a choice. It's a choice between Democrats who are putting people over politics and extreme MAGA Republicans. They are extreme when it comes to reproductive freedom. We believe in it, they don't. They want to criminalize abortion care and impose a nationwide ban. That's what the so-called commitment to America is all about. A nationwide ban on abortion care. We believe, as Democrats, in Social Security and in being there for older Americans so they can retire with grace and dignity. Extreme MAGA Republicans want to end Social Security in 5 years. We actually believe in democracy. Chairman Benny Thompson, Vice Chair Liz Cheney, Pete Aguilar, all of the members of the January 6th committee have done a phenomenal job of crystallizing the stakes with respect to American democracy and its fragile nature. Extreme MAGA Republicans apparently do not believe in democracy anymore. And so over the next few weeks, we'll have an opportunity to make our case to the American people about our track record of accomplishments, our vision for the future, and the consequences of what might happen if extreme MAGA Republicans are allowed to seize power. Thank you.